Presentation is going to be on Ron Lippitt and Gordon Lippitt, but I'm also going to show how I've continued their work. So let's just start by seeing Ron and Gordon. Ron's picture was a little bit more up to date. This is early picture of Gordon. Ron was the eldest. Gordon was the youngest. I'd like to point out that my grandfather, Lippitt, was a superintendent of schools in New Jersey, and there was a high commitment to education. My grandmother, Lippitt, actually went to college, and they had 3 sons, all of them PhDs. You don't see Vernon Lippitt, which was the middle child. He was a Rhodes Scholar in economics. But let me talk about what the 2 gentlemen on the screen have in common. First of all, basketball. They got scholarships to go to college on basketball. And they went to Springfield College, which was the home of basketball. They also both majored in psychology. They were very interested in the future. One of the things that they found very frustrating was when they went to speak to people, people always wanted to speak about their past work rather than talking about their future work. And they really did both of them, continue to learn, continue to grow. And so that was one of the interesting things. They would talk about their past, but they'd try to bring it into their future work. They both loved to cook. Ron was famous for his soups, and he would get a batch of soup made. And when he had a tea group, and we'll talk about that in a minute, in his house, he'd have this big vat of soup for everybody. Gordon loved to cook too, but his approach to cooking was a bit more scattered. He would open up the refrigerator door and figure out what was there and just put it together, and it always tasted great. And we had some very unusual breakfasts. That's all I can say. They are also were recognized by ASTD for many years. The OD award at ASTD was called the Ron and Gordon Lippitt Award. ASTD, of course, now is ATD, but they dropped the naming of awards, but they both were recognized. What they had in common it means that they also had some differences. And it was in their early careers. Ron always was in psychology academia. My father, Gordon, started off as a Methodist minister. So it was really a very interesting, different path for a while. Both of them my grandfather was very active in the YMCA. So both Ron and Gordon were also active in the YMCA. Another difference is their personality. Ron, as you can see from the picture, was very professorial. He's got his pipe there. He was more laid back, more calm. My father was known for his humor. I sometimes think that he really, when he went to seminary, he learned how to give a sermon in that 20-minute time, and he knew exactly when to put in the joke. And he was always had a joke at hand. He was very, while Ron was not too active in his movements, Gordon moved. There's a story, he set up the Organizational Renewal Institute with Antioch College in Seattle and with Don Swartz. And there's a wonderful story that they were all out to dinner and they were having a good time, and Gordon kept telling stories until the manager of the restaurant came over and told them, please stop. Everyone around, every table around you is listening to your stories. We have to get people to move. We've got other reservations coming in. I mean, he could truly command that audience with his wonderful stories. So he much more of an extrovert than Ron. One of the other things that was interesting was their client base was a little different. Ron tended to work with social groups, government and nonprofits. My father did too, but my father also worked a lot with business organizations. Ron was based at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, Michigan. My father was at George Washington University, which is in the Washington, D.C. area. And so what another distinction is that my father started a company that Bob mentioned, Organization Renewal. And it was an interesting design for a company because it was a company where everyone who joined could be a member of Organization Renewal, but also still have their own company. So there was this kind of collaboration in action that was really fantastic for those of us in the consulting business, because you had this wonderful network, but you could do yourself if you want to do something different, or you could do something with others. I think it was creative. I don't know anyone who's done that since. So what I plan to do is to cover Ron first. He was the eldest. And just this is a summary of what he did, and I'll go into some detail. So Ron is known particularly for leadership style, the group dynamics T group, future-based planning, change role, client involvement, collaboration. And I just hit on this last one for a second. What was really interesting, he always worked with other people. Some of them were his students, but he would work with a group during the day, and then he and the students would meet at night and discuss the day's activity. Well, the participants figured that out, and they stopped wanting to say, listen, we want to come to the nighttime activity, and we want to be part of that debrief. And this was an interesting beginning of this collaboration between facilitators and participants. What was fun, though, was because they all came together, they need to have something that was visual. And the only thing they could think of was they bought a big roll of butcher paper, and they started writing their notes on the butcher paper, which, by the way, we call today flip charts. But it was a really interesting start to again, a very spontaneous start to that process. So let me talk a little bit about the specifics for Ron. In 1939, it was the very first leadership study that was ever conducted. And it was done with boys who were 10 and 11 years old. And the three names were Kurt Lewin, Ron Lippitt, and Ralph White. And it was really funny. Kurt Lewin was assigned to work with the kids in a participative manner, but he turned out unable to do so. So the whole term laissez-faire leader was not planned, but it was the way Kurt Lewin could work with the boys. And so we came up with these three styles: autocratic, democratic, and laissez-faire. And obviously we know that the democratic group was the one that was more productive and stayed together and all that kind of thing. But it was really interesting to see that this man, that Kurt Lewin was immensely regarded. He was at MIT, and he had a following of folks that just were in admiration of all he did. But the trouble was he died very young. And so part of the reason NTL was established was to honor Kurt Lewin. But let me go on. The NTL history was Ken Benny from Columbia University, Ron Lippitt, University of Michigan, and Lee Bradford. He was at the National Education Association, otherwise known as NEA. And they got together and decided to create something that would continue Kurt Lewin's work. So the NEA got together with the U.S. Naval Association to fund a little bit. Then they got a grant from the Carnegie Foundation to continue, and the National Training Labs, or NTL, were formed. And NTL selected a place in Maine called Bethel to hold their sessions at a place called Gould Academy. And what was really interesting, it was a very collegial place. As Anne has mentioned, we all had teenage tea groups many years. When we weren't in a tea group or having fun, all the kids of these folks waited on tables. It was communal dining, sit down. But so we got to know a lot of these people. And my father at the time, when Lee Bradford was working with Ron and Ken to establish NTL, my father was also working at NEA. So he was also very involved in the start, but the three, Ken, Ron, and Lee, are considered to be the founders of NTL. Let me tell you that the T groups, otherwise known as training groups, were the real standard practice that NTL adopted. And it was to study how humans interacted in groups. It was to promote what I would call self-awareness. A lot of it's called mindfulness today. And it's interesting to see how many offshoots of the T group there have been. They wanted to practice inclusion and deep listening, which would probably be called active listening now. They thought it was very important to ask for and process and accept or deal with feedback. And some of that feedback wasn't always exactly what you wanted to hear. Sometimes it, sort of shook up your own self-image, but that was part of the awareness process. One of the other things of the T group was to study how to handle conflict. And again, feedback, when you're really encouraged to be open and honest, sometimes that feedback could be uncomfortable for people to hear. They did encourage authenticity, and they were really working for emotional intelligence. Again, some of these words have taken on different meanings since then, but really the T group or the training group was an intact team that usually stayed together for 1 week or 2 weeks. So this was not a quick get to know you process. This you really got to know these people. And if I take a look at the T groups, I can tell, from my opinion, it's encouraged engagement. It's the self-help group came from this. Obviously, emotional intelligence came from this. The importance of facilitation came from this. So there have been a lot of offshoots of the T group. I think it's usually called group team building now, but with a little different slice. But again, a lot of our work is around group help development. Another part that Ron did was he developed his own plan change process. Now, again, he was a follower of Kurt Lewin, and Kurt Lewin had a 3-phase process. It was called unfreezing, change, refreezing. And that was great, and it really was helpful. But there's an interesting kind of concept in there that change could end. You could just refreeze it and just enjoy it as a new refrozen package. And it didn't have a lot around inclusion. So Ron's plan change effort started with need awareness, and then said, let's set the goals. And then there was that inclusion and involvement of people that wasn't necessarily in Kurt Lewin's 3 phases. I mean, he did it, but it wasn't part of his official change model. And then they would define the change and then implement and stabilize. So again, a different approach building on what Lewin had. One of the things that he's really known for is his preferred futuring. He had said that a lot of the changes we were doing were problem-oriented, and they weren't optimal. So he said the question was not, can we change the world, but what kind of world would we want? And so he had 3 questions that he asked everybody. What makes you glad? What makes you sad? And what makes you mad? And from that data collection, they would come up with something that was very aspirational. One of the exercises, I think maybe many of us have experienced exercises that look into the future. Helicopter in, what does that future look like? I used to use your organization has just been nominated in 7 years, and it's across the front page of the newspaper that your organization is the most outstanding organization in the state or the country. What is in that article that made your organization so outstanding? So he sometimes would work backwards as well as working forwards. But that helicopter perceiving the future concept was something that Ron developed. I'm not going to go through these books. I'm just going to tell you that they both wrote a lot. They wrote one book in common, the consulting process and action, which I will talk about, but again, very prolific in terms of his writings. What was really interesting was also to notice that Ron, they're both very interested in international affairs. Ron focused more on the East, Japan, China, Thailand, whatever, and Gordon focused more on the West, more of the European. So they were both very focused internationally, but and they worked together. They actually created an international consulting group association, and but it was really interesting to see, again, a little bit a difference in their split. So that's Ron. I'm going to switch and take a look at Gordon's contributions. He wrote a book, Organization Renewal, and it was a very different approach in the sense that for the first time, change started with individuals and then it moved to groups. In my mind, Gordon took it to organization change. So much more of a systemic, holistic process. And he also introduced what he called the interface process, which was the concept that when you make a change, there's a reaction. And that interface with the organization creates other kinds of dynamics, and you have to continue to make changes. He wrote a book called The Quest for Dialogue, and I'll talk about that in a minute, Leadership Life Cycle. One of the other things that he really focused on was not accepting the information that you have, but that you really need to search for more information, because that was the only way to get everybody on board. We'll talk about that because that was his multicular process. That was actually the last book he was writing when he died unexpectedly. Both Gordon died at 65, and Ron died about 68 years old. So they were not real advanced by today's standards. So let me talk about the book Organization Renewal. I had the pleasure of editing it, so I had some familiarity. He did have, again, a more holistic view, and he believed in an open system in the sense that people could study a system and analyze it, but he was really supporting the concept. It's still open, it's still changing. You can't go with the data that you got originally. Things are dynamically changing. He also suggested that any change process had to have continuous feedback because he believed that the change effort had to be constantly revised and updated. So it's interesting to me to see how people thought, just come up with a change, repeat it, eventually it'll get done. His concept of change was very different. It was much more dynamic and much more the need for modification, adjustment, again, using the feedback. He also stressed that the fact is that sometimes we look only at the people, but he said that there was a larger role that a society played to either encourage or discourage acceptance of that change. And he also introduced what he called the non-human aspects of change. These are the technical aspects. Sometimes I want to change, but the technology won't let me make it. I think we're seeing that right now. There's been a bill passed where small businesses can get loans, and the banks just aren't prepared. They don't have the systems to take care of this. Again, he was one of the leaders, in my mind, of taking this bigger look. He did know that a lot of change was problem-focused, but he also encouraged that it would be possibility-focused. And he also introduced the concept of managing the different phases of change differently. So a lot of the early change phases were developed by Kubler-Ross on the death and dying cycle. But those stages were transferred into change, and he developed how change agents need to alter during the different phases of change. And there was an argument whether OD is just training and just the same thing, different names. And he was adamant that OD was a broader set and that training is basically a subset. Again, some people would argue that that was his opinion. Okay. The organizational life cycle is something that he introduced along with the phases of change, because he said that leaders require different actions at different stages. And I think we know that in terms of project leadership. When you start a project, you're doing something different than when you're just launching it, which is different when you're running it well versus when you're closing it down. So again, part of the term of his book, Organizational Renewal, was this whole concept that the organization is a dynamic entity. And again, with our current COVID-19, I can pretty well guarantee you that what leaders were thinking about in February of any organization is very different what they're thinking about in April because of changing environments. He also suggested that the goal for organizations would shift by the stage that they're in. And when I was living in Miami and knew Bob, I actually worked for a company called Raycol Milgo, and it was a defense contractor. Raycol's a huge defense contractor in the United Kingdom. And it was really interesting. Milgo was founded by Mr. Miller and Mr. Gordon Milgo. And it was really interesting to watch how they started off with an engineer in charge because they were growing the business and coming up with modems and encryption devices. And then they had to gain market share. They put a VP, the salesperson became the president. And then we had trouble, the administrative finance person became president. So it was really interesting to see how the organizational challenges brought different presidents with different orientations to leadership. So, and that was something that my father had talked about. He also wanted to encourage people to grow their own profession across the different stages and recognize in our own careers that we're at different stages and we have to manage other people's stages also. So again, even if I know how to do something really well, that doesn't mean I know how to do all the stages really well. I got to keep learning. Both Ron and Gordon were very dedicated to continual learning. And again, he was introduced in his book, the concept of coaching people through their life cycles. So again, we were talking about how the T group came into maybe emotional intelligence study groups, self-help groups. Obviously, I think we could all say that coaching has come a long way. His book was originally published in 1982, so this was a few years back. So anyway, let me just suggest, again, he wrote a book called Quest for Dialogue, and I'm just going to show these to you because you know these well. He believed that communication had to be about reality as well as opinions and feelings. He encouraged people to avoid judging others prematurely or judging facts prematurely, and really was really very much against labels and stereotypes. What was really interesting is he had a period in his career where he worked in the Marshall Plan in France. So Anne and I lived in Paris for a few years. And it was during an interesting time when Americans, they wanted us out of France. I mean, we saved France, in the World War II. That's a sort, kind of a traditional approach to that. Of course, Charles de Gaulle would say that he did it. But it was really interesting to see how quickly both Anne and I learned how quickly we could get labeled because we were Americans. And so, there were interesting things that happened at that time. We had our tires in our cars slashed. We finally got moved into a building that was all Americans. The State Department basically bought it. But, it was really interesting as a young kid to be labeled so quickly and have people say not nice things to your face because we were pretty young. And people would just react because we weren't speaking French well enough. If we slaughtered a French word, we were criticized. So for me, I just went back to English, so. But it was a really interesting impact for me personally to know how much discrimination there could be because technically a girl with blue eyes and blonde hair, you would not have that kind of an experience.
And I had the opposite.
Okay. One of the other things in his book was the trust required for change. Again, Ann and I have different memories of different experiences. He did talk very early about how important trust was to establish a change successfully. He really talked about something else that we don't talk a lot about these days, how it's important to preserve autonomy, not to have too much control over the situation and the people. Again, this is where we're calling about, talking about forcing decision-making down in the organization, engagement, and those kinds of things. He also talked about how important it was for people who want to introduce change to be able to influence others so that you can gain agreement. He was not, and this is true for both Ron and Gordon, they were not proponents of forcing change down just from the top. Just make the CEO announce it and then it'll happen. I had a wonderful client who I was working at the Department of Energy, and he told me, Mary, I'm on the B team. And I said, what's the B team? Well, I be here when it starts. I be here when it ends. I'll just wait it through. And because there wasn't this effort to gain influence and agreement. Another thing that he really supported was the continual research, data collection, and the importance of how data collection can trigger creativity and obviously coping. I think we call that resilience now, but he called it coping. He also believed in experimentation. So it was sort of like an FDR kind of approach. I'll try something. If it doesn't work, we'll do something different, but we're going to learn. I mean, there's a lovely phrase, I'm either right or I'm learning, which means I had a failure, but I could learn from it, and then I can continue to improve. So he did have, again, this spontaneity and this flexibility that has not always been the hallmark of every change model. So let me cover his multicular process. This is a process that he was introducing to handle wicked problems. And wicked problems, I mean, you have simple problems, you have complex problems, and then you have wicked problems. And the wicked problems were societal in nature. What he was talking about here would be something like a COVID-19. And what he said, for these wicked problems, we really have to have all the professionals represented. So I need a lawyer, I need a doctor, I need an architect, I need an accountant, I need an educator. And he said, you cannot solve these societal big problems, because what he's done is he's basically gone, we started with T groups, individuals, Ron took it to groups, Gordon took it to organizations, but then he took it further and went to a society kind of change effort. And so he was talking about the wicked problems that exist in our world, and that he was a firm believer that they could be resolved if we could bring all the professions together and recognize how the systems were, in addition, complex. Not only was the problem wicked, but the systems were complex. And he really, again, a lot of effort on searching for facts. So just to be fair, he wrote a lot of books too. And the last one that on the list for both Ron and Gordon is The Consulting Process in Action. By the way, it's still available today. So let me just talk a little bit about that. They identified the stages for consulting. And what he's really doing, I think both of them were doing. The early OD people thought they were change agents. They were change advocates, and that they had the knowledge to implement the change. And what was really interesting, I worked for the Navy's organizational effectiveness program. The Army had one, everybody had one. But many of the change agents were telling the commanders in charge what had to happen. And surprise, surprise, there was a tremendous backlog, rebuff, that where the Navy, the whole military, they canceled every OE operation across the military services because the change agents had come on too strong and had made conclusions and plans that weren't as well informed as it could have been. So Ron and Gordon wrote The Consulting Process in Action, trying to get change agents to be more consultative. And they identified these different phases of the consulting process, suggesting you come back, you meet somebody, you start a discussion. And one of the big things they stressed in their book was the importance of contracting, knowing exactly what outcomes my client was expecting, what outcomes I was expecting. And it was also something that had a requirement in it for a stage of evaluation. So they had a real interesting kind of concept that we can't be successful unless we all actually evaluate our impact. So that had to be in the contracting stage. And he literally wanted contracts in writing. Obviously, big supporters of diagnosis, action planning, whatever you'd like to call it, follows, then getting the goals and getting the client on board, getting a group of people involved in the planning process, recognizing that even if you're an inside consultant, you can't have all the information that you need to have. You have to involve other people. Then take the action, and again, the revisions, the modifications, the updating, the mid-course corrections, whatever you like to call it, and then contract completion. To them, this was a values statement saying that I cannot complete my contract until I've done the evaluation and trained everybody I've worked with to carry on without me. And it's really interesting because that's such a different concept from a lot of the consulting companies today. A lot of the consulting companies come in, I tell you how important, how terrific I am, and you're going to need me forever kind of thing. They had a very different philosophical approach to the consulting process, which required that knowledge be transferred internally. So again, in the belief that it would be continued if the internal people had the knowledge to continue it and make those adjustments. So I'm going to stop for a discussion because I've covered a lot, I think. We've covered, the start of the T groups, but I'd like to ask folks, what should be added, changed, updated to these contributions? What could be missing? So this is a chance for you to either offer some ideas, or you could tell me that they covered everything. I don't know what you want to say, but what do you think needs to be changed or updated from the work that's been presented so far?
Let me just weigh in really quickly if I can. This is phenomenal. I mean, I am so impressed with this. I can't believe that all of this stuff was going on, and I've heard a lot of it, but never knew that Ron and Gordon were so much at the core of all of this stuff. So I am really sad this wasn't reported, Mary. This is really a masterclass in OD theory and philosophy. So thank you very much. I'm not sure I can respond to what's missing because I'm so, at this point, kind of overwhelmed with the shower of wisdom.
They were brilliant. I mean, they really were.
Just to let you know,
can I just add that some of the other people that they had around them were also quite brilliant in terms of seeing some of the applications in education, particularly adult education.
Yeah. Well, that's the NEA influence, right? I mean, that's what they really brought in there.
Correct. My father was actually a director of adult education for NEA.
Yeah.
Lee Bradford had a higher position, but obviously when they started the NTL movement, the three of them, adult education was critical.
Yeah.
I just want to let everybody know I have software on my computer that records a screen, so I am recording this, and I was going to get it to Gabby at the end.
Okay.
Wow.
That's fantastic.
That's great.
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Okay.
this presentation needs to be made in other places at other times. I mean, it's unbelievable. Do
Hear,
you
hear.
make this presentation anywhere in your teaching, Mary? Or
No.
did you put this all together for us?
I put it together for you.
Oh, man,
Thank
you
you.
need to, God, this has got to be extended. Got to be extended.
Well, it was fun. I called Ann a couple of times asking for input too. And I will just say that I learned some things, or some things were refreshed in my memory. But when you think back that he started in 1939 and NTL 1947, you know, they really were at the forefront, seriously.
Yeah.
Um,
I have a question. This is Sandy.
Hey, Sandy.
Hey, well, first of all, I just want to say, Mary, this has been so insightful because I'm always amazed by all the information you have to offer over the years, but this additional insight about the history that you have is really impressive. I mean, I knew that you had a history in your family, but the way it's all evolved and how it affects the field of AD is amazing. And so my question is as I see you continue to take this evolution into the business arena, in today's, and you're doing such an amazing job with that, of course, with the leadership spectrum. Now I'm wondering, with COVID-19, I see an element that when you talk about, I think when someone, I can't remember who you mentioned, but you said that trust is a big, huge component. And that's always been something I've been working with, is to help establish safety, as a lot of OD folks are. Now, with this environment of COVID-19, this idea of safety is interesting. It's a complex idea because now people are not thinking about the safety of their dynamics and the feedback they're receiving and you know, coworkers. It's more about, they're worried about their health, about their safety, and they're worried about how they're going to be able to make it in this world. So I just wonder, has any of the history that you're talking about involved anything along those lines?
Yeah, I mean, that was the multicular process. And I think we see it coming together today. I mean, we have supply chain issues, we have medical issues, we have nursing issues, we have staffing of grocery stores, we have legal things. You know, in Florida, the governor has said one kind of stay in place. The states have said another, not states, some of the counties have said another kind of stay in place, and they're saying, where's the constitutionality there? And so, you know, how do we find gig workers? I mean, think of all the questions that have come up that require different professional backgrounds and expertise that we didn't have before. Ann, we're going to add something?
I was going to just say, and I think there's wonderful examples of private government partnerships.
Yeah, I just heard that.
Just didn't exist before.
I'm sorry, somebody was going to say something? I just heard that Jeff Bezos has given $100 million to food pantries. You know, I think Oprah gave $10 million. I mean, the demand and the whole thing about distribution of food. I mean, that's a whole different. Masks, yes. And again, a whole question in terms of trade, in a sense that, you know, China seems to have a lot of the medical manufacturing that we need, but we have a trade policy that says maybe yes, maybe no. But now they're bringing it in. You can't solve these wicked problems like COVID-19 through one set of eyes. Okay, I'm going to use that. I'm going to move on to how I've continued to work. Maybe this will be of interest to you. If it's not, that's fine too. But this is what I've taken from it. I think leadership has 4 aspects. I think it starts with traits and then in personality. So, by the way, I had to make sure I understood what was the difference between a trait and a personality. So a trait is something in me that's non-observable. So am I honest? Am I generous? Kind of things. My personality are the kinds of things that you could observe. It's how I interact with people, how I communicate. And this is where I think originally leadership started with traits, and it was usually the man was a trait, and usually it was the son of the king. So that was something that we started and we said, oh, all leaders are either going to be family members, aristocracy, or they had. But and this is true. Every presidential election we've had, the taller candidate has won, because we assume height is sort of like being with daddy. We always looked up to daddy kind of thing. And so we assume that is the leader that will be best for us. But then we did the personality, and we've done a lot with personality. The Lew and Lippitt White study, but then we had Blake and Mouton, we have Hershey and Blanchard. We've got lots of folks who studied personality. And then in about 1980s, in my memory, we got into the skills set. We started studying competencies. Do I know how to do a budget? Do I know how to do a performance appraisal? Do I know how to do a strategic plan? So all those skills have been taught. And we have a lot of inventories around, do I have those skill sets? So we had inventories around personality, style, communication. We've had them around skill sets. But there's one thing we've always overlooked, in my view. This is a biased point of view now. In my view, is the fact we've always left out the situation. We've always left out the context. And I think that our current COVID-19 shows us that sometimes leadership has to consider the environment that they're working in, the circumstances, the reality. So my work talks about trying to see things differently. So here's an exercise that you can do if you want to. I'm going to ask you, please point to a distant object in the room, just something with both of your eyes open. Okay, now close your right eye. See where you're pointing. Open your right eye and close your left eye. See where you're pointing. It jumps. We have a dominant view. We see things from a dominant perspective. And we don't always see the same thing. And I think this is shown up in the fact that we have witnesses to car accidents where somebody will say the car was blue, the other one will say, no, it was green, no, it was black. We see things differently. And we cannot really implement change until we get everyone to see the same situation. And so what I work on is a situational aspect of leadership. It doesn't negate the importance of honesty or generosity. It doesn't negate the importance of having a good communication style, interaction. It doesn't negate the fact that you need to know how to do the job. So I would say that leadership has historically looked at who is the leader and how smart are they. And those are great. We still need that. But we need to also know what is it that we're facing and what should take priority. And so my work, I think, continues the work of Ron and Gordon in the sense of collecting information, thinking about a broader context, not just the individual, not just the group, but the organization, and I'm saying also the environment that we're in. So my work is a little different, but to me, it continues the progression of trying to deal with the challenges we face today by adding that situation to leadership. So I'm going to suggest that I look at situational mindsets. A mindset is a lens that we wear to take in information. And sometimes the information I take in first, if I'm an accountant, might be different than the information that you take in first if you're an architect or if you're a lawyer. But what we focus on sometimes limits us, like that dominant view where we aren't considering the other perspectives. So I'm trying to encourage people to recognize 6 main lenses that we need to wear to make sure that we take in all the information and then do the evaluation of what is the highest priority. So a situational mindset focuses on what's the most important given current circumstances, what is the critical fact that should drive decision making, what's the most desired result or outcome for the current time. And again, COVID-19 is a perfect example in the sense that I would say last month, nobody was counting PPEs. Last month, nobody was talking about ventilators on a national scale. So, and what we're doing is changed because the situation has changed. And by the way, this is hard for some people to grasp because everything has been about personality. That sometimes when I talk about the 6 mindsets, people think, well, you know, I'm creative and you're not, or I'm an accountant and you're not, and you can't handle your 1040 for the IRS. I am not an accountant. I care very little for accounting practices. But when it comes tax time, I adjust because it becomes a priority. So this is not about my personality or my skill set. This is saying, what am I focusing on at this point in time? And it's again, we tend to see everything through either a Myers-Briggs or a DISC or one of the many different instruments out there, which is assessing me on a permanent, more sustainable assessment. What I'm looking at is very different. It's a snapshot saying, what are you trying to achieve right now? And again, the minute I achieve something, I move on to something else. So what I would like to do is ask you to take a part of a questionnaire. So this is just going to be 2 questions. So, but I'm going to do it. I'm going to start by asking you to pick one task, one project, one assignment. So I know that everybody has, like, I'm going to say 10 assignments. I want you to pick one thing that you're working on right now and keep that in mind as you answer the questions, because all the alternatives are all terrific. This is not a situation where one choice is I contribute to charity and the other choice is I abuse animals. I mean, it isn't that kind of an assessment. Everything is a great option. So I'm going to ask you to look at 2 questions and pick the letter that you would do given that task or that task at this point in time, knowing that, you know, if your task was just given an extra $5 million, you might do something different. So it's at a point in time. It's not a label. It's a snapshot. So here's the first question. Given your task and you're facing a decision that's critical, what would you do first? Would you spend time generating multiple solutions? Would you get others to move fast? Would you develop a system to analyze the alternatives? Would you start calculating the benefits and the risks? Would you collect information from others so you could then later analyze? Or would you question the assumptions that are associated with the situation? So again, all these are good. Think of your task and pick a letter, please. Okay? Anybody want more time? Okay, here's the second question. There's an organization that has already done your job, your task beautifully. I mean, it's been outstanding. How would you describe that organization? Would you describe it as innovative, customer-focused, flawless execution? Would it be efficient, high quality, and high productivity organization? Would it be a high-performing culture with a talented workforce? Or would it be an organization that's strategically driven? So again, given your task, and this other organization has done a fantastic job with it, how would you describe that other organization? Would you please pick a letter? Anybody want more time? Okay. Your letters will tell you what your mindset was for that specific task at a specific point in time. No labels. In other words, If my house is on fire, I want to talk to you right now. My house is on fire. I don't want to talk to you. It has nothing to do whether I'm an introvert or extrovert. I don't want to be burned. Okay. So again, it's a hard switch into looking at situations. But if you answer the A responses, the mindset you're using is creativity or inventing. I'll give some other definitions in a moment. The B responses are catalyzing. The C responses are developing. The D responses are performing. The E responses are protecting. And the F responses are challenging. So what does that mean? Again, it says if you're inventing, you're looking at developing new products and services. You think maybe the design of a phone that Nokia is producing, I can make look snazzier, and I'll call it the iPhone, and people will buy my phone over Nokia's phone because it's the style. I could add new features, or I could try to come up with internal synergies, do something different. This is the innovation, the creativity kind of aspect. That's what you would think is needed for your task. So in catalyzing, you're saying I'm focused on my competition in the marketplace. I'm going to look at my customers. I'm going to try and grow my customer base. I'm going to try to retain customers. I'm going to try to have my brand get recognized. Under developing, what I'm looking at is how well we execute. We're not going to have silos in our organization at all. We're going to be looking at seamlessly working together. We're going to set goals, build systems, and establish clear policies. You know, are we going to have an internal promotion or an external promotion process? Are we going to reward based on teamwork or individual work? So, I mean, those things would be focal points. The performing is taking a look. I'm going to streamline processes. This is where quality control, Six Sigma come into play. It's also where I try to streamline the cycle time, the inefficiencies, the organization. This is where I'm trying to show that I can have a return on investment or a profit margin contribution or some other kind of way I could show that I've had some good impact, hopefully. Protecting is taking a look at developing the talent, the engagement, the high-performing culture, the bench strength, the engagement, the teaming, the collaboration. Those are other kinds of focal points. The challenging mindset's interesting. It addresses emerging needs, evaluates risks. It takes a look at maybe a new niche we could come up with. Amazon used the challenging to say I could sell books online when everybody thought you had to buy a book by going into a bookstore. So that's a different mindset. All of these are great. All of these are needed, but I can't do 6 things at once. There used to be a line saying faster, cheaper, better. I want you to do work faster. I want you to do it cheaper. And people would say, yeah, well, which one do you want first? And so some leaders would finally answer, I want it cheaper. Because if I do it cheaper, it may not be better. It may not be faster. And we have to recognize that we have these trade-offs. And what the situational mindsets is saying is that basically we have to do a better job of looking at all the information when we're dealing with complex situations. You know, if it's not complex, just keep doing what you've always done. You don't need any of this. But the number of complex situations that we're facing is increasing dramatically. And we have to be better at this than we've been at the past. So let me, here's just another definition of this.
Can I ask a question before you move on, Mary?
Yeah.
If we go back to the previous slide,
Sure.
do I answer the question from a situational perspective by what my preference is or what I think is best for the situation? So
Best for the
innately,
situation.
do
Best
I?
Situation. It's the situation that drives. In other words, Gabby and I earlier today were talking and we were having some technical issues. And we weren't concerned about a lot of stuff. We were just working the nitty gritty. That was a task. That's what we focused on. Now we're going to focus on something different. I can change my mind about what I need to focus on. In fact, if you just go back a little bit, take a look at this slide and take a look at COVID-19. Do you think we should look at multiple solutions for trying to be able to develop treatment plans? Do we need to get others to act quickly and stay at home? Do we need a system to analyze the alternatives we have for hospitalizing people? Do we need to calculate the benefits and the risks? Do we look at models and we say there's going to be 100,000 to 240,000 people dead, therefore I'm willing to spend blank amount of money above the normal cost of a ventilator because I'm looking at the risks? Do I want to collect information from others? Do I want to find out what they did in Italy, what they did in Spain, what they did in South Korea, so that maybe I could take some of that information and bring it here and inform my decision making? Do I want to question the assumptions that are associated with this situation? Do I want to question the fact that heat will automatically kill the virus? That's an assumption that some people make. And so what I'm saying is all these assumptions, all of these choices are good, but I can't do all six at the same time. And I'm just going to pick on Bob for a second. I'm going to say, I want people to act fast. I want people to get home and stay home. And Bob is saying, but Mary, you got to find, solutions. You got to come up with treatment plans. And then Ann says, no, so many people are going to die. We got to do this. And then Sandy says, no, we got to collect information, what they did. We're all right, but we're going to talk past each other and maybe get into conflict unless we stop and say, okay, what are the facts that drove Mary to say that we have to get others to act quickly? What are the facts behind this? See, we tend to talk to people about the actions we want, and we don't always share the facts behind it. I actually wrote an article, and if anyone's interested, I could send it to you. It's in the OD Practitioner. And it was an interesting situation where I had a new CEO outside the industry come in and take on this huge organization, international organization. And some of his vice presidents had asked for the promotion and hadn't gotten it. And so he knew that. And when he came in, he came up with a strategic plan by himself because he was such a great new leader. And surprise, surprise, the vice presidents didn't like it. And he said he had trouble. And he called me in and he said, they're trying to sabotage me. They want me to fail so they can get the job. And then I talked to the here you go, Rodney, talk to people. Talk to the vice president. Well, the president's trying to show that he's a lone ranger. He's going to get rid of us and replace us with his own team from his last company. And so that everybody was working on intentions. And so I had them take the situation mindset indicator, and what he found out, he's growth, business, new growth. And we asked, why did you choose that? And his answer was, the board told me. Well, if you're a new president from outside the industry, you always do what the board tells you. But what was really interesting, I said to the vice presidents who didn't want to do that, why don't you want to do that? And they said, we're losing corporate accounts. Our quality is too low. President didn't know that. You can't grow a business if you're losing corporate accounts. And so by discussing the facts, they got on the same page that they had to work with the quality and then they could move to growth. The quality was important right now. It was an internal look at how we're doing our work versus the president's thought that what he wanted was the external work. Look at the customers, look at the competition. How can we improve our brand? So it's not a question of who's right or wrong. The question really is what's most important at this point in time. And what the situational mindsets does is it asks people to ask questions. Mm-hmm. So if, Gabby is telling me one thing, I could say, what information has helped you make that decision? Again, no accusation. I'm not doing anything personal. I'm not saying to her that I'm sorry, I guess we're both I'm wearing pink, you're wearing red. So yeah, I can't say, the people that wear a red top are more talented than people that wear a pink top. I mean, we're taking personality out of it in this aspect. Yes, personality is still important, but in gaining agreement, we got to talk about the facts and make sure that everybody agrees on the goal. Mm-hmm. And so what we do, this is an example of buying a car. And so if I want to buy a car, am I going to put more emphasis on whether it's stylish or what new feature it has? I won't buy it if it doesn't have Bluetooth, or I won't buy it unless it says, blind spot monitoring. Or am I going to focus on the customer service that this person offers? is it a question I want to look at the dealer? I got to tell you a story. I bought a Peugeot. It's a car made in France. It was a lovely car. It worked well until it was in a car accident. And I had to get the parts from France. Do you know how long it took to repair that car? Now I always will check where's the dealer? Okay. What some people will look at a new car and say, what are the miles per gallon? What is the insurance cost? What is the amount I have to pay? Some people will look at a car and say, is there a warranty? Is it a safe car? Has it been approved by the highway inspection group that rates cars? Or some people will say, hey, is leasing a car a better option or should I buy it? I just got married. Maybe a sports car won't work for 10 years or 6 years. We may be having kids. So all of those are good questions, but I'm not sure I can find a car that fits all of these dimensions. I would have to decide which one might be more important than the other. We make those decisions all the time, but it's important to have all the choices out there before you make a final choice. That's my comment. So here's an example.
I just need to say goodbye. I'm going to be leaving you. Thank you for letting me sit in on this.
It was good. Thanks, Ann, for coming.
Bye, Ann. Take good care.
Thanks, Ann.
Stay safe.
So here's an example. A consumer products company plans to launch a new brightly colored laundry detergent that's approximately a 2-inch square pod for home use. What might be an unanticipated consequence?
Kids eat it.
Yeah, that's my first thought.
Yeah. And the kids at first were young kids. The babies would eat it. And then it became the Tide Teenage Challenge where they went on video, ate one of these things. Yeah. They did. It was they had the dump the water on you challenge. They also, teenagers had a Tide swallow the Tide pod challenge.
Yep.
So, I mean, when they launched the product, my guess is they didn't consider that factor. What could go wrong? Again, incomplete analysis. So I'm going to suggest that most of us know that the average memory is 7 items plus or minus 2. So I can only remember 5 things. Somebody else can remember 9. But remembering is not the same as working memory. Working memory is very much more limited. So how many of you can drive a car and write a proposal or an article or a report at the same time? And I don't want to see any hands going up. So what we find is our working memory is basically 2, if we're really smart, 3 things I could do. Keep in my mind at the same time. And this is not any reflection of my IQ. It's just the fact that my brain cannot constantly work on 3 different topics and do it well. Frankly, it's usually 2. This is why we do either or, pro, con kind of thing. So what happens is that our world is so complex that we have so many more things to worry about and consider that things fall through the cracks. And there was a book that was very popular called The Checklist Manifesto, where a doctor introduced a checklist into the surgery suite. And what they found was that checklist of things that we have to do, all those things to check it off, reduced errors and deaths. And again, I'm not talking about people who aren't talented. Surgeons and operating nurses, room nurses are very smart, okay? But they have so many things to consider that things were falling through the cracks. And so one of the goals after people take and learn about situational mindsets is we give them a checklist of questions to ask. So, and this is just, there's usually 11 per mindset, but I'm just obviously can't put that much on the slide. But, so in the inventing mindset, take this time to say what's outside the box, as well as inside the box, as well as under the box, as well as above the box. If there were no constraints at all, what could we do? If I had all the money in the world, all the people in the world, all the facilities in the world, what can I do? Catalyzing mindset. What is the competition doing? Even nonprofits have to worry about the competition. Just the food banks right now, they're going to have to start working together. They're not going to see each other as competition, but in a way they are. And we see this in some of our nonprofits. They want my money. They want my money. Who do I give my money to? What will grow our position, our brand, our market, our customer base? Again, since some of you are from Moffitt, I could say, what does the patient like? What are they valuing? What is it that they care about? That's a different kind of question than what does a surgeon care about, or what does sometimes a nurse. Sometimes in hospitals, doctors and nurses are not quite on the same path, from my experience anyway. Developing mindset, ask questions. What are our plans? What are our schedules? What are our goals? If I announce something and I expect it to be done next week, but I don't set a timeline and I don't give people the resources, I can't get it done. So I got to sit back and say, what do I have to put into the plan to give people the resources, the time, the experience, the education, whatever else? I worked for an insurance company. They launched a new product. It was a good product, really good. They forgot to write the scripts for the call centers. So they started advertising, and the call centers got all these calls. No, I don't know what you're talking about. They did recover, but it would have been better if the call center had those scripts from the start. So what are the systems that need to be improved? Right now in the state of Florida, the unemployment website has crashed. Now, it's been crashing since 2015. And every year they say, they got to redo it. But with our new environment we're in, a lot of people have been trying to get online. They can't, because nobody looked at the question, what are the systems that we need to have? And they didn't have the assumption that maybe we would have to have, huge numbers of people unemployed at the same time. Performing mindset would say, what are the cost-benefit analysis? How do we improve our processes? How do we improve our quality? How do we improve our deliverable cycle times? Protecting mindsets. Do we have the skills and staff we need? Is there a high level of engagement? And the challenging mindsets. Are our current assumptions valid? What new business models are possible? What should we be doing differently? Now, I want to tell you, I've got data on, my original research was on 6,000 people. And if I asked you now where most HR, OD people, training people would be, most people would say protecting mindset. What we found is they were challenging. They were always looking at what we could do to improve and question the existing assumptions and trying to introduce new ideas. And I could go on for this for way too long, but there's some interesting change dynamics between three of the mindsets that are externally looking and want rapid change. The other three mindsets want to look internally and want managed change. And what happens is the rapid change people call them managed change people resistors, and of course, the conflict begins.
Mary, I have a question.
Yeah.
It seems naturally that there are some jobs, some professions, some personality types that it would be easier for them to stand in the mindset of, maybe performing or protecting, just as you said with HR. So are we saying that with the situational mindset that it would be better to be done in a group, like you sit down with different participants, kind of like with appreciative inquiry, you have your different stakeholders that care about the situation, and you look through the lens of each of the mindsets, like consciously look through by asking the questions so that we can get to a solution? Is that kind of what you're saying, or am I just making that up?
No, I think you're correct at half of it. This does have a professional slant in the sense that, accounting people are more likely to have a performing mindset because they're dealing with data. And marketing people and sales people are more likely to have a catalyzing mindset. But we actually did a study where we had people take the inventory and the MBTI at the same time. There's no correlation by personality. But if you tell a salesperson who's want to focus on the customer, that there's a problem in production and deliverables can't get out, you will see how fast they can change their mindset. And in our today's world, and this happened after 9/11 too, nobody cared about the physical environment. So after 9/11, people started thinking about, do I want to work in a high rise? Right now, we're looking at the protecting mindset. Is it sterile, or is there protection for our employees? Publix just put up shields for our cashiers. So we change. We might want to have our profession, our tasks may have us home in one area, but that does not limit us. The other thing that I'm trying to do, because I can't always get people together, is I give people the checklist of questions and tell them you can ask these questions of others. They don't have to be there. But if you don't have the answer, please go out and get it. So while this looks very bottom line results oriented, it contributes immensely to engagement. It breaks down the silos, because if I don't know anything about staffing, I better talk to somebody who does. If I don't know anything about what we're doing in R&D, I better talk to someone who's doing that. If I don't know what we're doing in terms of quality, I better check. So
Nice job on inclusion, Mary.
yeah, it is. This is inclusion. It looks like some people tell me this sounds, oh, this is too harsh. It's all bottom line oriented. But it's not. I mean, it is, but it's also very inclusion. It is inclusion. But I don't necessarily get the chance to have the team around me all the time. But basically, it shows a lot of respect because I'm asking questions. I, as a leader, am admitting I don't know everything. Are you ready for that? It's a real surprise. And I sometimes use the leader's job is not to know everything, but is to know all the right questions to ask. And that's where I'm coming from. I'm trying to get people to ask the questions so they get a full picture before they jump to a conclusion. Okay, here's another example how it could be used. Oh, I'm sorry, Kathy, you could ask a question?
Yes, I love this, Mary. Thank you so much. And what also popped into my mind too, you're opening up so that you can stay away from groupthink by having all these different situational mindsets. So
exactly. Yeah. And the other part is it's habit. And you see, when we're under stress, we tend to do what we've always done because what we've always done has been successful. And if we don't check the situation, our environment may have changed and it won't be successful. And the trouble is a lot of the big failures these days is because people don't look outside. Why didn't Polaroid go digital? Why didn't Kodak go digital? Why didn't, the number of companies that fail. Did you know that Blockbuster had an opportunity to buy a company called Netflix? And they said, no one will ever buy stuff that way. And Netflix is doing well, and Blockbuster, I think, has one store left. So this is a way to make sure that we don't get blindsided, we don't fall into traps. And to me, that is a key role for a leader to do. And it doesn't have to be a person with a title. I think anybody who has to make a complex decision needs to be sure that they're looking at something from all perspectives. And it's not comfortable, and it is a little more time consuming. But the point is, if you get it right the first time, you don't have to redo it later and then redo it again and redo it again. I think we've seen the discomfort in our society when we say, okay, we need masks. No, we don't need masks. Yes, we need masks. Let's get it right the first time. It will help everybody. And then you will also, the other thing that's sort of interesting is that change has always been sold on the basis of a vision and a tagline. I worked for a client and he said, my goal is to empower, free, and serve. Oh, I sort of like that. Didn't that sound good? So I went and he said, no one's doing it. Fix it. So I talked to the vice presidents and the employees, and they said, we don't know what it means. The guy was charismatic. He went to every place and gave a wonderful speech about empower, free, and serve. And we had taglines in the cafeteria. We had them on the employee badges. And they were guessing, I'm going to be empowered and freed from red tape so I could serve the customer. Well, I don't know. So I actually had a wonderful moment. the president and staff were in a room, and I said, I want to talk to you about Empower, Free, and Serve. Sir, can you define it for me? And he said, I want the vice presidents to tell you. And of course, they all looked down. I said, sir, would you please be the one to define it? We're going to empower the people to shop 7 days a week instead of 6. We're going to free them from having to come into the store. We're going to have more online operating. And we're going to serve them by establishing new distribution centers. All of that could have been solid, but it sure wasn't conveyed in Empower, Free, and Serve. If you want to have change, you're going to have to get into the details. You're going to have to get into the facts. And again, the image is, I just need a slogan, an aspirational thing. There was I don't know if it's a true story or not, it might be, that there was a CEO gathering in New York City and they were all asked to put their mission statement on the table. And they couldn't tell the difference because all of them were going to be world leaders of high quality with a wonderful workforce. I mean, I'm not saying they shouldn't, but if you're going to have change happen, you're going to have to be a lot more specific. So here's an example how you might use it on day-to-day work if you're just an outside consultant. You're working with a new CEO whose strategic plan is centering on growth. We're going to grow the market share, grow, a catalyzing mindset. You think that concentrating should be on improving the quality of the current services because there's some new complaints and there's a lot of employee turnover. So you want to talk to the CEO and you want that CEO to listen to you. And you know the way to get a CEO to listen to you is talk about what they care about, you know? So you have a choice. Which of these phrases would you use to start the conversation? Would you say, hey, CEO, I've got some interesting news about a strategic alliance? Would you talk to them about, I want to talk to you about the risks we're encountering? Would you talk to them about, I want to talk about the efficiencies in our operations? Or could you want to talk about brand building, customer retention? Or do you want to talk about IT systems? Or you want to talk about increasing the customer base? What we do with mindsets is we find out basically what is important to them. And you can then start the conversation based on that. And, you know, this is not like having to decipher whether I'm an introvert or extrovert or not. I would just say, sir, ma'am, what goals are you working on right now? Or, ma'am, what are the metrics you're monitoring most closely? If they're monitoring customers, I can figure out, hey, I know where they're coming from. If they're monitoring profit, I can find out where they're coming from. Now, again, I mean, you could take the questionnaire too, don't get me wrong. But this isn't, I mean, it would be a lot better if everybody had to depend on the questionnaire, but for me financially, but you don't have to. You can ask the questions. What have you recently accomplished that you're very proud of? That will get a good conversation started. And you could get, it's about goals, it's about concrete things, it's about facts. So to me, the other aspect here is that Warren Schmidt, who was a member of Organization Renewal and did a study for the American Management Association, and found out that 18% of everyone's time in an organization is spent on conflict. Whether you're the CEO or at the frontline level, they're going to have a problem. And what's interesting is those problems are usually transferred into personal things. She doesn't work hard. He goofs off. She takes too long for lunch. She's building her career at the expense of my unit. She's stealing my budget. All that kind of stuff you cannot resolve. One of the things, when I lived in Miami, I worked for Metro-Dade County, and my job was to head up the performance appeal hearing process. At that time, we had 36,000 people. There were a lot of appeals. And it was interesting to me to see how many could have been solved if they had just talked about the facts. But they made it personal. Because when we talk about personal conflict, when we talk about conflict, we assume it's personal. So if we talk about the facts, we can find a way. So I first disagree with somebody because their actions don't sit right with me. That's fact. Or they're trying to achieve something that I don't think is worthwhile. That's a fact. But if I then, those are facts, those are objective, those can be discussed. But if I let it slip into the subjective factor where I'm saying your agenda is out to hurt me or my unit, or if I start saying, you know, you're a goof off, or you're a resistor, or you're a saboteur, or if I get to the point where saying, you know, you're unethical, those things you cannot solve. You can go back in history and refight that as many times as you want, but it won't happen. If we can understand how to handle conflict in the first two stages, it's the action that you took that I'm not sure about, it's the goal that you're pursuing that I'm not sure about, we can literally cut, I think, conflict in half. It'll still exist, but you can't wipe it out. But it will be cut in half, and we could save a whole lot of time. So again, I am speaking about talking about reality, the circumstances, the situation, the environment, the challenge that we're facing. And I'm going to close with this. Would you please, privately, you don't have to answer this, what color is a cardinal? What was your answer? See, we don't always know all the things that we should know. I think I've got a slide that I do enjoy. It ain't what you don't know that gets you in trouble. It's just what you know for sure that just ain't so.
That's cute.
And there's another line I like. When you see things differently, the things you see change. And so that's where I'm coming from. It's what are the facts that you're taking in and how are you processing them? And again, I think this continues the work toward change, toward getting people inclusion and respected, including diverse points of view. I think all of that was part of what Ron and Gordon were developing. I'm just trying to take it to a larger level because I think that our situations have become much more unpredictable and much more challenging. So that's it for me. I do have a book out that I will plug called Situational Mindsets. It's available on Amazon as an ebook or a print book. So there's my plug for the day.
Mary, we have some questions about, is it okay with you? I mean, that the recording is available. Barry recorded it. And is it okay with you? I just want to ask your permission.
Yes.
That we can use and is the PowerPoint available? I know you have it on PDF that we could send to people via PDF.
Yes. Only constraint is you got to send me one too.
Oh, okay. There you go. We'll share. Very nice. Beautiful.
So what questions, comments, anybody? I left time. I know I ran too much like a presentation, but I felt if I left time at the end, it would be okay.
Do you know if your father ever had any contact or discussions with Marv Weisbord?
Yes.
He did?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Because you know what? Gosh, it's a long time ago that Marv Weisbord really pushed hard with a process he called Future Search. And, and I had no idea that your father had taken it that far. And it seems to me that what Marv did was build on Gordon's work with the focus on the future.
I think that both of them, because Ron's work was the preferred future. So, I think every consultant who has a lot of experience is worried about the future and trying to make the future better. So I would say that almost every consultant out there is trying to fix the situation maybe that's painful right now, but also move forward. I actually wrote a blog. It was called The Problem with Problem Solving. And the problem with problem solving is somebody presents you with a problem, you solve it, and you haven't figured out what the real context is or whether that really is the most pressing problem to do. And I'm sure I speak for all of you that when I go to a new client, they always tell me, we need team building. Right. It's true. But you know what? Sometimes it isn't. But, we don't do the analysis. And one of the other things that happens is people ask for what they've heard of before. And I don't know whether you're aware of it, but the MBTI was really taught in colleges, and it still is. And so that is where everybody thinks, okay, leadership is the MBTI. They don't think beyond that, or DISC or whatever other model you have. But what I'm trying to say is that leadership's a lot more than that. To me, those four, is the traits. I mean, if somebody's dishonest, no matter what I teach them in terms of doing a good performance appraisal, it isn't going to work. If somebody doesn't want to talk to you, I mean, I was working for a vice president of HR, and I got my performance appraisal on the chair of my desk chair and was told, sign it and return it to me. This is the vice president of HR and we're teaching people how to do performance appraisal. I mean, there's such a disconnect in organizations, and the only way, in my mind, that we can make those connections is start talking about what's most important to me, what's most important to you, what's most important in the long run. Let's find a common ground, because that's what this is doing. It's trying to find common ground in a win-win solution.
What would you think of eliminating the term conflict management and replacing it with the term engineering agreement?
I think that would be fantastic, because the moment we see conflict, we sort of put our dukes up and start fighting. I mean, and this is where, or some people tell others that all I need to do is repeat the same thing 20 times and I'll wear you down, Bob, and you'll finally agree with me. That's a compliance agreement, which is, put you on the B team, you'll just be passive. It doesn't win for me your active commitment. Yeah, but conflict that's another one. I have poor teaming and I have conflict management. That's what a lot of leaders assume is needed. So conflict management, I'd love to have go away because conflicts can be good. I can have an idea and somebody could tell me that there's another idea, and technically that's conflict because we have two different ideas, but I just learned a whole lot. I think it's a great idea.
Well, good, because that's what I've been doing.
Well, we're in agreement again.
Yay, team.
Yay, team.
All great stuff, and a couple of thoughts that popped into my head just when you were saying what's most important to you, instead of the old, what's in it for me, right, with them, what's in it for all, instead of, just what's in it for me, and trying to change that concept so that you can, get to something that's gonna work better for the whole system. I love that. So, Gabby,
is what's in it for them. Because and that example about talking to the CEO who wanted growth and just coming up with a different way to start the conversation. If you start a conversation with someone, so I got 5 minutes. You talk about what they care about, they'll give you an hour. But we do have to say, instead of what's in it for me, what's in it for them. And if I can give them what they want and want to talk about, and I can then introduce what I want to talk about, then we can have common ground.
Absolutely. And then what other I think that spoke to me was, because I wrote it down, was this is a way to help people to start speaking the same language, because they're going to get the idea of what does that mean to you? Like you mentioned those 3 words. Well, that guy's meaning was totally different than the other people's meaning. And so you got to get to that same common ground of what is the meaning?
Correct. See, I think that you could use the different mindsets. So, do you think inventing is most important right now? But then we know what inventing means, or do we think challenging is needed, or whatever?
Gabby, I just noticed that Christina had joined us somewhere along the line, as she wants to introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. Sorry I joined late. We've got a little going on. I'm Christina from Moffitt. I actually work in IT, but I work a lot with my friends in org development. I'm a teams coach in our world. Can you guys hear me?
I can't.
Barely.
Would you do it again?
A little light.
It's a little light? Okay. Lost my headset. Trying to find it. Okay. Let's see if this, can you hear me better?
Better. Better.
Okay. Cool. I'm Christina. I work at Moffitt as well, in our IT department. And I'm the Agile coach in IT. And I've been working a lot with my friends in org development, who I enjoy working with very much. And right now we're in an interesting place with all of this and trying to figure out how to lead and help these teams in a remote time for us.
I'll just add for 1 second. I think when we're dealing with remote teams and we're going to be focusing more on the task at hand, so having a framework that works at tasks and goals will become more important.
Yeah, I'm definitely thinking about how do I help these teams now with the tools that we have. And Mary, I already downloaded your book.
Oh, thank you. Okay, here's the second question. Please write a review, because it turns out that quantity of reviews now on Amazon has become critical.
Imagine so.
Excellent.
This is great. Thank you.
I should mention that the book starts off with a story about a woman who gets hired in and as the new vice president of sales, and she's not necessarily warmly greeted. And it's how she turns around her team, then she turns around the silos, and then she turns around the owner of the small print shop. And so the beginning is just a story, and the end has the model in it.
Nice. Nice. This is great.
I've already bought the book and read it.
Yes, you did.
And read it.
Yeah, it's hard to put down, so be careful.
I need to tell you that Bob and I actually used to be in business together in Miami, and he was the chair of my dissertation committee.
Oh, nice.
Yep.
Nice.
Quite a dissertation.
Yes, it was quite something. I studied the reward systems and savings and loans organizations to find out the correlation between reward systems and the success. I read an article in 1979 by Stephen Kerr, and it was called The Folly of Rewarding A When You Want B.
Oh, yeah.
And it had such a profound impact on me.
Interesting. Interesting.
Mary, can you repeat that, please?
Yes, the title of the article was The Folly of Rewarding A When You Want B. And the author is Stephen Kerr, Kerr, and I think it was 1979.
Feel good.
All right, thank you. That's useful. We talk a lot about sort of, what motivates people and leadership at the organization. And one of the things that we find so much is that we're asking for one thing, but rewarding them on something else. And so then we expect different results, right? So, so it's fascinating.
In general, I would say we reward people individually, but we say we want them to work in a team, and people will recognize that it's individual rewards. By the way, one of the things I think will change as a result of this COVID-19 is that job security is going to become much more discussed than it had been before. I think, pay had been maybe one of the top things, or development or my career growth kinds of things. But job security is going to become extremely important.
And I think working at home is going to grow also.
Yes,
It is.
You're going to see a lot of empty buildings out there.
Yep.
It is. We
Yep.
have
Yikes.
Sandy has her hand up. I wonder if we could give her an opportunity to ask her question. Sandy?
Thank you, Gabby. I just wanted to ask you, Mary, so given COVID-19 and given that this situational mindset is really relevant more so now than any time, you've given us some tips on how to do consulting. Are there any other tips that you can give us on how we can use this situational mindset framework in today's environment in our own roles, maybe in a way that helps spread the word about this, because this is really good stuff. And of course, it's relatively new, relatively new framework. So we want to get the word out so people know that this is something everyone should be thinking about as much as possible. What can we do?
Well, I think that you could start talking to people about, what are your goals and what are your priorities. I don't think the word lens is always the best one to use, but I do think that you could ask people about their priorities, and then I think you could help talk to them about what is their driving priority. And to me, I give people, when you take the situational mindsets indicator, you get a report immediately, and it tells you, it's about 10 pages, but it tells you what are the questions you're focusing on, and then what are the questions you may be ignoring. Now, you may be ignoring them because you've already addressed them and you know all the data, but you could also be ignoring something that becomes a blind spot. And we also do team analysis because we find that teams, once they're together, have coalesced around a mindset. And sometimes they're not looking at what they may overlook. So I think that talking about mindsets is a good way to say, what is the mindset that you've used to collect the information? And I do think that we have more information available to us. And the question is, how are we using it? And so I've been trying to get this out because I wrote a book. I did the inventory. I did the statistical analysis. Actually, I'm looking for, one of the things, I have a company in Japan who's been using this work. And in the last year, I have a company in Amsterdam who's using this work. So if there are other corporations who want to use this work, or other consulting companies who want to add this to their tools, I mean, the good thing about it is, when you say situational mindsets, it's not like somebody saying, I've already done that, because it's so new. So there's some advantages. So I do like it if somebody will use it. They don't need me. They could. There is a qualification program that's online that people could take so they could deliver the situational mindset indicator by themselves. There's a one-day program that they could use or not use. I mean, I am trying very hard to be flexible and adaptable. I mean, if I talk to people about adjusting to situations, I better practice it.
Well,
Mary, another answer to Sandy's question is the first half of the book, which tells the story of the vice president, is just loaded, in every other paragraph. Here's what you should say. Here's what you should do in order to make this work. So I think if Sandy read the first half of the book, especially, she would see tons and tons of examples of things to say and do.
Yeah, but I think she was trying to do something more. I think she was trying to say, how do we spread the news? And that to me is a little harder to do. But I do think that the comment she made about COVID-19 is really pointing out that one situation is basically closing down the United States. I mean, in 2 weeks, we've had 10 million people unemployed. And it isn't a matter of some leader was, right or wrong, and it wasn't a matter of a style. It is the situation. And so this whole concept of situationally based development, I think, is very timely. I also worry a bit because the companies are going to be so short of money and employees that I'm not sure development and training and new models will be the first thing they focus on. But I'd love to get it out there. If anybody has any ideas, I'm willing to do speeches. I'm willing to do things. So let me know. I think that one of my many limitations is I don't always think about marketing.
Well, I have an idea there too, and that is maybe what we can do as an OD group is, as we're sending out information on LinkedIn and Facebook, we can kind of, do more likes to your what you put out there on LinkedIn, Mary, and get the word out that way. And also, I did have one follow-up question. So Mary knows this, the others don't, but I was just recently, I just finished the qualification course that Mary did, and I did read the book, Robert. so I really, and of course I still feel like I've got so much to learn about this because there's all the situations that could be used as examples to help illustrate the effectiveness of this framework with CEOs and other leaders. So one question I have is, you mentioned, Mary, that that there is a one-day a facilitative, I guess, a one-day workshop that we could do. And so how do we go about doing that? How do we go about working on that with you?
Just contact me. I've got email directions up there. I'm basically a person that likes to talk to other people, so that would be fine. The Japanese company is only using inventory. They put it into their existing training. The Amsterdam company took the one-day course, and they're titling it differently. They're titling it as critical thinking. I don't care how you title it. I mean, that's up to you. But again, there's a train-the-trainer process for that. There's the online qualification for the inventory if you want to just do that. But the train-the-trainer is a different process because, some people just want the inventory. Some people want the course. I'm trying to be flexible.
Mary, I'm interested in all of it. So I just need to reach out to you and connect. Is that correct?
Yes.
Perfect.
There's 2 emails up there, or if you want to call, it's 727 934
934
9810.
9810. Yeah, because I have a coach who is he's been doing international work and so forth, and he has a private group that I belong to, and I could make this pathway into that group using this, and that would be phenomenal expansion of the concept and stuff like that. And I think it'd be great because he is using the term situational awareness, but not in this context. So I would be really interested to see what context, because he doesn't explain it. But in this group, there's also a billionaire who's an industrial psychologist and stuff like that. And so anyway, I think there's lots of opportunity for what this is.
Oh, wonderful. And again, my goal is to spread the material because I truly believe it will help. It doesn't have to be me delivering it. If you want to deliver it, that's fine. I just want the material out there. One of the things this is a sort of sad story. I used to wait on tables at Gould Academy when NTL people were coming for their 1 week or 2 weeks. And it turned out my high school principal was in the group of the table I was waiting on. And we were talking and we were joking and we were calling each other by our first name and all that other kind of stuff. Then I went back to school and the change was like that. He lost everything. And so one of the deficiencies that have been noted about the T group experience is that it's an individual intervention. And so when they go back, there's no support for that change to be maintained. And one of the things I'm trying to do here, as someone already suggested, is to create a vocabulary and a framework and a checklist that everybody can use together, because that's the way to really make a lasting impact. And again, the checklist manifesto showed the power of a checklist. And, pilots have a checklist and lawyers have a checklist. Leaders are facing as many variables now, much more than they did 50 years ago. We need help. The checklist is there and they could tailor it to their organization. I was working in a call center in a insurance company. So, they didn't have clients, but they had advisors. So they could take the checklist and tailor it to their specific industry and function.
Nice. Mary, we have Sandy has a question. She has her hand up. Sandy?
I can't see Sandy, so I can't see her hand.
Okay.
Sorry, Sandy.
And maybe she already asked her question. Sandy?
Oh, there we go. I already asked my question and I had since put my phone on mute, so I had to figure out how to put it back off of mute. Sorry about that. But yes, you answered my question because I am very interested in doing workshops using situational mindset, and you told us that it's on your website, so I'll look there for more information.
Very cool.
There's also some good blogs on my website. Again, one of the popular ones recently was the problem with problem solving. But I think I have like 50 of them there. Not that anyone wants to read 50, but there are a couple there that might be of interest.
Nice. Mary, I have kind of an offshoot question from the beginning of your presentation. So forgive me if I, take us in a different path.
Fine.
Well, it seemed to be at the beginning when we did have NTL and it was such a strong program, it seemed like we had a place where we could unify our OD leadership or OD philosophy. What are you seeing these days? Where do you see that OD has some common ground? Because I think when you say that training, many people are doing training and they're saying it's OD, I agree with you 100%. And so how do we where is it that people can go where they can really expand on the concept of OD and learn about it in a way where it's one kind of group? What is your thought on that?
Well, I don't know that I have an encouraging thought on that, because I could automatically say the OD network, but I've been a member, I've presented at several of the conferences, and I find that OD professionals in the OD network have made assumptions that they want to stick to. And basically, they're going to stick to the group dynamics. I haven't seen OD professionals wanting to move forward the way I would have thought they would have. So I don't have an answer. It seems to me that OD has a unique opportunity now with the level of disruption that we have in our world to really be of a tremendous service. And I think it just needs to be at a larger scope than individual coaching or just, a team improvement. But I have not seen OD professionals welcome a great deal of change. I have seen chief human resource officers or chief learning officers be much more interested in moving forward, adding to our toolkit.
Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Mary, part of my brain is kind of thinking, with everything that's happening and to different businesses and corporations and things like that, with all of the unemployment where it's at right now. We just talked about maybe more online businesses and things like that, that there's going to be a lot more consolidations of companies and mergers and acquisitions going on. And that's actually the space that I'm been heading into, is looking at buying and businesses and helping that process, so that the people that really want to retire, that built these businesses, can, and things like that. And so I think this tool would be really useful there, as well as all of OD, because they're going to merge two different organizations. And I was talking to my cousin who lives in the San Francisco Bay Area, Silicon Valley. Her husband is in M&A, and she was telling me that even at Facebook, she has a friend that's in HR that went to Facebook, and they don't even have some of the basic concepts that we think of in OD and HR in their organization. And so there's lots of opportunity out there, but it's kind of like, how do you find it and then make it happen as a consultant? That'd be my kind of question.
Yeah, I also think it's become more difficult because I think we've learned how to jump on the newest word, and so
Stop it.
a lot of people can talk. I mean, when Six Sigma was first introduced to this country, it was very data-driven, very specific, very technical. OD took it and made it group dynamics. And, we basically have to start being more insightful in terms of what we're talking about, and make sure that, again, the comment that was made earlier, that we're talking, when we use a phrase, that we're talking about the same thing. Because, again, I talk about results and other people talk about results, and I'm talking about business results and they're talking about something else. But technically, we're both saying the same word. So it's a little challenging, because when we search online, we're using a single word, and we're not going to get as comprehensive or as effective a search unless we have more precise language.